Welcome to Heartistry. This is Farah Yasmeen Shaikh, and I am thrilled to have a very special guest that we're going to really hear about her journey in general, the important work she's doing at present, but really what's led her to this place. And I believe the hearts and minds that, frankly, she's touched along the way. So please join me. We've heard a little bit about this very special guest, but please join me in welcoming Dr. Geetha Murali to Heartistry.
Hi, Farah. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. And even before we hit record, we realized we could have done this in person. You and I are both in the Bay Area, but
It would have been a lot of fun to do it in person. We'll have to
yes,
do that another time.
exactly. This will be the first of many a conversation, maybe not
Most
all of them
definitely.
recorded.
Most definitely.
Well, Geetha, what I love to do, again, we heard a little bit about you really more in your professional sphere. In your introduction. But what I love about this podcast, it's not about the sound bites, it's not about the highlights, so to speak. We really get to know each of our guests. And for that reason, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about your origin story, if you will, where you were born, brought up. Eventually, it will lead us to the present, but we certainly don't need to rush.
Yeah, well, I was born in New York City in the late 70s, and I was born to older parents, relatively speaking, and was brought up as an only child, only daughter in the family, which meant that I did grow up a bit, I think, early
Huh.
in terms of, taking care of my parents and the household. And I grew up with a real sense of responsibility for the family's future, if you
Hmm.
will. And that was largely because of, that origin story and the realization pretty early on that my life could have been different
Hmm.
than the life I was living. And I felt very fortunate to have parents, to be able to be educated, to have dreams. And I was reminded by my mother of that that being not always the norm in our family
Hmm.
pretty regularly. And that was because she was the eldest of seven in a family where child marriage was fairly common. And my
Okay.
grandmothers were married at the ages of 2 and 14. And she, being the eldest of seven,
Yeah.
and a girl was pressured to get married at the age of 13 and had to fight that tradition at home, eventually left home, joined the Indian Army to train as a nurse, and came to the
Okay.
United States on a nursing visa and put
Wow.
herself through school later in life, made the decision to get married later in life. And as a result of that, had me later in life. And so she really felt it her responsibility to make sure I could pursue whatever dreams I had. And in her mind, that was largely being as educated as possible, as quickly as possible.
Hmm.
So that was a lot of my childhood was really shaped by that belief.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it is really important. And I think, anytime in whatever generation somebody is able to break the cycles, if you will, of what they've known. And I think it's just, we're all products of our environment. And so just a lot of admiration and respect for your mother, who that is what she had known and had to work so hard clearly to work against that. And so you were born, raised in New York City. Did you stay there into early adulthood?
Well, I ended up moving to India in during my childhood for a few years. My parents wanted to move back as my grandmother had gotten sick and they wanted to be closer to her. And they thought they would go back and settle for good.
Mm-hmm.
So we stayed in India for a while. I went to a convent school. I had the opportunity to learn to read and write my mother tongue. I had spoken it at home, but hadn't learned how to read and write, and so I had that opportunity to do so, and just be in a very different environment for a period of time. And I do cherish those years,
Mm-hmm.
having been connected to the family and community in different ways. But then we returned to the United States, and my mother had, in the meanwhile, after coming to the US, had trained as a statistician and eventually had gotten her doctorate in public health. And so she was working in the pharmaceutical industry. My father was a financial advisor. And so he had a little more flexibility in where he lived. So we ended up moving pretty regularly every few years in the US
Okay.
after coming back. So I spent time in Michigan, in North Carolina. When we first came back a few months in Texas, and I had to learn how to adapt, and it was, I think,
Sure.
probably one of the primary at the time. Of course, I was upset every time we moved and had to start over. But as I reflect on it, it's one of those life experiences that made me more adaptable and able to connect, I think, with people pretty quickly as
Mm.
I moved through life. So ultimately moved to California in 2000 and have been here for about 25 years. It's the longest I've been anywhere, frankly.
Okay. Well, and you mentioned adaptability, and undoubtedly, I would agree with that. It wasn't my personal experience, but I can imagine, you're adapting to these new environments, communities, but you're also therefore observing them. And, I think that we know when you've lived in the US for, in your case, most of your life, it's extremely diverse, not only ethnically, racially, but economically, all of these things. So I imagine consciously or not, you were also traversing a lot of just even seeing different communities.
Yeah, you get that sense of adaptability, of course, as we were just talking about, and resilience, but also a sense of self-trust and
Mm,
the ability to rely on yourself. You develop a sense of curiosity, right? Because you're
mm,
exposed to so many new things with each move and new people and relationships and ways of thinking. And I do think that guided a lot of my sense of the importance of humanity, and that you can learn from so many different types of people with so many different perspectives. And it's definitely something that I value, right? Those experiences as I went into this career, and I know we'll talk about that in a bit, but being able to go to different parts of the world and spend time in different communities with stakeholders of different backgrounds, and to see the value and strength that each person can bring to any situation that we're faced with.
yeah. Let's go ahead. We'll take our first pause here. Welcome back to Heartistry. This is Farah Yasmeen Sheikh, and today we are in conversation with Dr. Geetha Murali. And, hearing just, again, sort of the way that you are navigating this childhood and early adulthood. I would imagine you mentioned you've been, when you said late 70s, that's right in my window of my birth time as well. So I'm able to map that.
Yeah.
You're probably about in your early 20s when you started living in the Bay Area,
Yes.
right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And so basically, I'm curious to know, and one of the questions I always love to even ask prior to a conversation is sort of how, like, what are some challenges you faced? Often when we look at someone's bio and even hearing in the introduction, we're hearing like the successes, of course. But what you shared was really just, navigating an unconventional career path. So I'm curious in your educational journey, what were you intending to go towards? How and where did that divert, perhaps?
Probably not surprisingly.
Mm,
I was raised as a STEM kid. Science and math were critical, and math particularly. I
mm,
think because my mother ended up going into statistics and my father into finance, and they were able to build careers for themselves. That if we kind of look at what their primary focus was, it was
mm,
to ensure that they could have enough income to support their family and to send money back to their siblings, to take care of them, to put them through school. And so they were very much focused on career journeys that were stable, that allowed for that type of predictable income. And at the time in the United States, looking at careers in math, my mother felt like, that's, you won't have a lot of competition there. You're going to be very good at it. You're going to get a job. And so before I knew it, I had many degrees. I had finished my master's in statistics, and I began working in the pharmaceutical industry, supporting clinical trials and that sort of work. And that was, in my early 20s as I came to the Bay Area. And I, for a period of time was like, wow, I've made it. Right. I've got the job. I have a steady income. I can support a family, etc. And looked around and had this moment of, is that it? And as I was continuing to go to work every day, I felt like I didn't really have the time growing up, or the headspace, or even the understanding that this was a possibility, to learn and expose myself to other things. Because all of my learning was very much focused on that goal, that achievement, getting the degree and getting the job. And so I took the opportunity, being near Berkeley, to take courses in other topics. I had been a dancer growing up, and it was a passion of mine. I was able to join in the South Asian Studies programs at Berkeley, ended up in a course on South Asian politics, where the professor had a background in statistics and was running a number of studies applying statistics to the social sciences. And all of a sudden, my mind opened up as I started recognizing that the value of functional skill sets that I had developed was that I could make a choice and apply them in different ways. And I ended up going on a completely different path, first considering a career in academia. So I went on and did another master's, my dissertation, my doctorate, spending time in South Asia, collecting, voter surveys and designing them, and thinking about the relationships between party politics and ideology and what voters want from their governments. So some really interesting conversations and opportunities to spend time in communities, but realized I wasn't going to be an academic through that process.
Okay.
I felt like I really had a calling to do something that I felt directly transformed or changed the situations that I was facing. And to be very practical about that is, I was in communities where the biggest issues were, is there a light on my street? Can I have a ration card? Where can you help us get a school that's closer for our children? I mean, those sorts of issues that were just so basic and felt like they shouldn't be an issue, right? In this day and age, we know what children need. We know what families need to be successful and thrive. And so I ended up starting to explore the social sector. And so as I was writing my dissertation, I had that opportunity to work with the American India Foundation and to see how nonprofits were run, to look at programs and how they were grown and implemented, and to find a way to directly support communities that I felt deserved that support. And through that process, I had a lot of questions. I was still pretty young, right? So I had a lot of questions. Is this a sector that can accommodate my entire career? Should I make a clean break and make that switch and take that risk? My parents were still there, with their points of view on stability, and could I convince them that this was a path I wanted to take, and not have them worry, right? There were all those kinds of considerations, but ultimately I did make that break. I ended up doing some other things along the way. Was part of a startup for a period of time, just given my connections in India. I taught at Mills College. So I was really trying to see if, the social sector as a full-time career move was the right thing for me. And as all of this was going on, Rintareed was growing in size, and the American India Foundation had funded Rintareed's initial expansion into India. And when the time came where Rintareed was building out its corporate partnerships team, it felt like the right combination of skill sets that I had. And so I made that move and have been here ever since.
Amazing. And what year was that you started with Room to Read?
2009. So I've been here about 16 years
Okay.
and
Amazing.
7 as CEO.
Okay, I was just going to say how long in this particular role. Wow. And I just want to highlight one thing that you said moments ago. Taking your previous experience and applying it to this, right? I mean, it sounds like you came into working with their corporate partners. Right. And so
Yes.
there's something about that. And I think that, I often have had this conversation with folks over the years. Yes, I've been in the nonprofit sector for decades myself, very much in the arts. Now, art, being an artist has been the full time for multiple decades now. But the point being is that even if short stints, being in that corporate sector, being in other environments, I am certain has benefited me here. And I'd like to think my presence there also benefited and changed things up. And so my point is that individuals, and clearly with your extensive, not just educational pathways, but work experience, I can imagine that was really a match made in heaven, even if not so obvious to others right away.
I think that's absolutely the case. I had been on a pretty conventional path in the data sciences without even
Mm-hmm.
realizing I had been, right? And realizing that I didn't want to just, I guess, analyze the problems or be a part of the numbers, but I wanted to be more directly involved with solving
Yeah.
problems that I was seeing, and knowing that the types of skill sets I had, be they, statistics or, that kind of analytical mindset, could be helpful in this context, took some time to figure out. And so as I joined Room to Read, I think the ability to speak quantitatively
Mm-hmm.
made a lot of sense, right? To a lot of our corporate partners, we work with a lot of
Yeah.
companies and individuals out of the finance sector, and a lot of multinationals who are looking at how they can make efficient and effective investments globally. So I think that background helped. What I didn't quite realize was that some of the other skills that had
Mm.
not been formally trained on, be that, since you're an artist, I think will appreciate this, that being a dancer and being expressive and performing for a lot of my childhood gave me a different perspective on
Mm.
how people feel and how
Mm.
they express themselves and how they communicate and connect. Being a child that moved around a lot allowed me to connect very quickly with different types of people. And so those were additional skill
Huh.
sets that, when paired with the quantitative sciences, made for the right combination, I think, of
Yeah.
perspectives as we were growing Room to Read. And, the organization was growing and diversifying. I needed to work with different stakeholders. We needed to do revenue modeling for the first time in terms of, diverse revenue streams and thinking about our future growth strategy. So all of these things came together, it felt like, at the right time for
Yeah.
the organization and for me.
Ah, beautiful. Let's go ahead. We'll take our second pause here. Welcome back to Heartistry. Today I am speaking with Dr. Geetha Murali. And we heard again in your intro, and we've certainly referenced a handful of times Room to Read. I would love for any listeners who are not familiar with this really awesome organization, tell us about Room to Read.
Room to Read is a global organization focused on creating a world free from illiteracy and gender inequality through education. And as of this year, we've benefited over 50 million children across 28 countries, surpassing our initial goal of benefiting 40 million children by the end of 2024. In terms of our core programs, we are focused on foundational learning, and that is literacy for younger children, ensuring they have both the skills and the habit of reading. And our adolescent gender and girls' education programs support girls to complete secondary school and develop key life skills with the role models they need to be able to see what's possible. More recently, we've been working very closely with governments and other systems like media to be able to integrate our programs into national education systems and ensure scale and sustainability and meet children wherever they are, because we know that children are learning outside of school these days as well. And so a lot of work on media. We're one of the largest local language book publishers in languages not profitable to publish in, but wanting to make sure that children have all the tools they need to succeed and make good choices in life.
Amazing. I mean, you mentioned over 28 countries. When was Room to Read founded, started? What year?
It was founded in 2000 by
Okay.
three incredible founders who came together with a vision to initially bring books to children who didn't have access to books.
Yeah.
It was really that simple. But over time, just being a group of people who learn and test and want to design programming that is best suited for the communities that we're working in, we created an organization that is 90% staff based in the communities we serve and is very focused on learning from our implementation. And so what began as an organization that was providing books is now creating, implementing large scale literacy programs that help children learn how to read. It's giving them books and libraries spaces to practice those reading skills. And reading and literacy, are truly gatekeeper skills to be able to accomplish most other things and most other world challenges, be it poverty, poor health care, violence, conflict, are all rooted in a knowledge and understanding of your environment, the ability to influence and control that environment. And without being able to read and apply those skills, it's really hard for communities to come out of that cycle of poverty. And so that the reading and writing work that we do is focused on early grades, because we know if children don't learn how to read by grade 3, they probably never will. And our work with adolescents is helping them with the life skills they need, be that leadership, negotiation, being able to really navigate the day-to-day challenges that adolescents face, primarily girls, to make sure they stay in school and have choices for how they live their lives.
And you mentioned the staffing, like you really try to staff through communities, the local communities that you're serving. And so I'm curious, is that having had some exposure to international development work and such, is Room to Read on the ground there with that name and brand, if you will? Or are you partnering, say, with NGOs or other local institutions? You mentioned government, but I'm just so curious, how does that work?
Yeah, Room to Read is Room to Read all over the world. And we have about 1,200 of our own staff. And in some countries, we have our own country offices and teams that are working directly with schools and adolescents and mentors to be able to ensure that children are completing school with literacy and life skills. In many countries, we do work with local partners and NGOs and consortiums of organizations, but all with the end goal of improving literacy and life skills for children. And so that can look different in some countries. And in those cases, we're working with the government directly, or we're working with publishers or a combination of local implementers. But ultimately, we're building operational models that we think have the best chance of success in any given environment.
Amazing. And do you offer programming here in the States as well?
So a few years ago, we did conduct a feasibility in the United States, feasibility study to look at if we could add any value in the United States, particularly given that reading scores were not as high as they could be. And so we did a feasibility study. We looked at which states had lower reading scores, which children's organizations maybe could benefit from some of the skill sets that Room to Read had, and began doing children's book publishing in the US, as well as some summer reading programs and after school reading programs to support local nonprofits who are working in this space. We also recently, because of some of our media work, released a feature film called She Creates Change, which highlights through animation and live action the stories of young women from all over the world who've used life skills to change the trajectory of their lives. And that film is now available at www.shecreateschange.org in multiple languages with curriculum. So we are working with partners all over the world, as well as our own teams, to be able to bring that content to girls everywhere. That film recently just won a Webby through People's Choice voting, which it makes me even more proud, given that it really is to serve adolescents all over the world. And so we're excited about the opportunities that exist when you bring diverse stakeholders together from around the world with a common cause, which is it to me still seems so obvious that children need to learn how to read and kids need to complete school in order to make good decisions.
Let's go ahead. We'll take another short pause here. Welcome back to Heartistry. This is Farah, and we have been speaking today with CEO of Room to Read, Dr. Geetha Murali. And, you know, I can't help but wonder, so much of what you said about Room to Read, like you said, it seems so obvious to you, and I think it probably is to many, and I would certainly consider myself one of those. And yet we are living in times where we are seeing these very critical programs, international impact ones at that, really lose their footing and frankly lose their funding. And so I'm curious to know if how an organization like Room to Read, how you are navigating these particular times. I'll start there.
It's challenging to be in a moment where so many are so distracted by so many things as an organization that is so mission driven and so focused on one set of things. And we recognize, of course, that what we do is so interconnected to geopolitics, to the markets, to all the various systems that we operate with, be they formal school systems or non-formal systems, media systems, et cetera. So we have to be conscious of that. That said, it is very easy to get completely consumed by everything that's going on around you. And many organizations, frankly, don't have a choice but to stop doing their work, let go of their staff, pull back their programs. At Room to Read, we have been fortunate that we're privately funded for the most part. And while there is some impact from some of the changes in foreign assistance, it doesn't stop us from forwarding our mission through the models that we've built. And what we're trying to do is be a strong partner to organizations who have worked in similar spaces and who we've learned from over the years and who we can continue to collaborate with, or be, a partner in thought in terms of what they can do next with their IP, and be as supportive as possible, because ultimately this work has to continue. And I think no matter what your politics, and we work in so many countries around the world, we've worked through so many administrations, regardless of party, regardless of platform. And I do believe that you make your way through it for the things that really matter for the world. It's only possible for us to continue doing what we do if we believe that it's worth it, no matter what the cost. And so I think that's, as an organization, what I've had my team be focused on. We have to support those who do work that we believe in and who ultimately are going to stay with us and other organizations who are looking to make sure that, basic educational rights are are provided to every child in the world. And in the meanwhile, things like nutrition, health, of course, they impact the education space. And so we're doing our part to stand with other organizations who can continue to do that work or trying to reorganize to do that work. And in the end, it is my strong belief that humanity will win out. And no matter what people's political affiliations are or beliefs, that we will continue to do the work we have to do, and that the world will continue to improve over time. And I have to believe that, otherwise we're paralyzed and unable to do what we think is right.
Mm. No, that everything you've said, it makes honestly, it makes perfect sense. And I would only add that I feel that it's the work of organizations like Room to Read that are actually going to bring about hopefully longer term systemic change, right? The more empowered and educated a child is, they're more informed. They have agency. They have, all the things that we hope and believe and have to have true optimism about, right? That's what's going to make the change. So,
yeah, I have to believe that. And I have to believe that no matter what that child eventually believes and grows up to believe, that has to be that individual's choice that comes out of the information that they consume and process and their experiences. And we have to allow every individual to live a full life, right? Food and water and shelter, it may be what keeps you from dying, but it's learning and it's education that makes you live a life and be fulfilled. So both of those things are needed. I think if we're going to shape the world we want to live in.
100%. So how can folks learn more, support the work of Room to Read?
Well, at the very basic level, I hope you will visit our website, www.roomtoread.org, learn about our work, share our stories. If you're on social media with your friends, with your family, with your schools and your children, I think that our work resonates a lot with young people. And we're seeing more and more of our supporters come from younger generations as Room to Read proceeds past its 25th year. And that's important because these young people, I think, understand the value of the education that they're afforded and recognize the injustice when children just like them are not receiving those same supports. So, share the story. If you can, support our work in whatever ways possible through your companies, as individuals, through our chapters. We just ask that you get involved with Room to Read or other causes that matter to you. I think we're in a moment where people can shape the future by the work they do. And every individual, may not be able to change the whole world, but can definitely change their own world.
Thank you. Let's take one more pause here and we'll come in for a short segment. Welcome back to Heartistry. This is Farah, Yasmeen, Shaikh, and we've been having an informative, definitely enlightening conversation today with Dr. Geetha Murali, and just really want to, name and extend some gratitude for you for the work that you're doing. Clearly, again, it's years of experience, years of somewhat of having a goal, and also letting yourself kind of flow to the places that we're calling you. And I think that that's such an important lesson in and of itself. And you're leading by that, with that example. One of the last things I always love to ask my guests, and in so many ways, you've already answered this, but, for me, this concept of Heartistry, the name of the podcast, it's the word heart and artistry put together. And it's really for me about speaking with individuals who bring up passion, compassion, and commitment to whatever they're doing. Hence the reason I say you've already so beautifully exemplified that. But what I'm always curious to know is when you hear me speak about Heartistry now, perhaps when you saw it first, when we first reached out to invite you to be on the podcast, what, if anything, it invokes for you?
I think the whole concept of expression and communication is very underrated in the business community. And if I think about my career and what's made me relatively successful in doing the things that I've put my heart and mind towards doing, it's been that combination of quantitative, analytical, functional skills, and a true deep respect and enjoyment of humanity and
Mm,
people and what they bring and how they express themselves and how they think, and valuing that and highlighting that beauty that does exist in
mm,
individuals, especially in moments where you can be so overwhelmed by the negative and the fear, and finding connection and feeling grounded with the people you've chosen to spend your life around
mm,
can give you great calm. And I think conversations like these and podcasts like yours really highlight the importance of human connection.
mm,
And I guess the other thing I would say is, a lot of times people ask me, what was your life plan? And, how did you
mm,
plan for the future? And how did you become who you are today? I really do feel like there is this sense of luck. And I know, there's that great
mm.
quote, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. But there is, for me, there was definitely the sense of, yes, directionally, I know what is important to me. I know what I value. I know as I grew in my career, what kind of leader I want to be. So I knew directionally where I was headed, but I
Mm,
had to leave space for the creative and
mm,
for those moments of inspiration and the things that I didn't expect. And it took me some time in my life because I was so achievement oriented and I was so goal oriented and I was just, striving to
yeah.
to do the right thing and be the best at what I was doing, that I sometimes missed those
Mm,
moments of creativity and innovation, which sometimes lead to the biggest
right.
transformations in your life. And, when I think about the film that I just mentioned, that came out of 2020 and the schools closing down around the world and us realizing we had to reach children through other
Hmm.
formats. And at the same time, I was going through a medical situation where I had spinal surgery, I had a tumor. And for the
Mm,
first time in my life, I was looking at my mortality differently.
yeah.
And so all of a sudden, I came out of that willing to take more risks, willing to do things differently. And what has come of it for Room to Read has been
Mm,
truly something that none of us could have imagined in terms of our media strengths and our ability to benefit more children more quickly. And so I just tell your listeners and everyone I
yeah.
possibly can that wherever you can, make that space for people, for innovation, for brainstorming, and look for those moments of
Yeah.
of inspiration that might push you to places you haven't been before.
Oh, I love that, Geetha. Thank you. And as you're talking, you almost answered the very question, but I'll just name it regardless. Is that when we talk about creating space, sometimes it's a little bit, how does one do that? And I think only that person can answer that, right? Sometimes it is literally putting yourself in environments to create space for XYZ. But I also, what I love that you just said is look for that. It's almost like seize those moments when they even present themselves without you planning it,
That is
right?
absolutely the case. And I tell people all the time in every one on one conversation that you're having, that's this moment of potential mystery. There's all these things about this person that you don't know, their
Yeah.
experiences, where they've been, the things they've seen, the people they've talked to, and being curious and asking questions. You get so many nuggets of just inspiration and fulfillment and joy from talking to someone new that
Yeah.
you don't know anything about, and I think sometimes we maybe over engineer
Hmm.
creating space when there are all of these moments that you can leverage right throughout through
Yeah.
the course of the day to find just that.
Ah, my goodness. I'm so glad we went to all these places in these last moments. Everything was great as far as the conversation, but wow, I really hope people sit with what you've just reflected on, because that is something. But
Thanks, Farah.
again, yeah, no, it's been such a joy to just learn more about you, of course, your work specifically, and yeah, just all these aspects of your journey. So we really appreciate your time today on Heartistry.
Farah, it's been an absolute joy. And thank you so much for doing what you do. And a big hello and thank you to all your listeners as well.
Until next time, Len, like we said, hopefully in person.
In person, all those things we couldn't say on the air.
Yes, and we're going to seize lots of those moments.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Thanks so much.